I don't like talking about relationships, especially online. But I know that someone needs to hear this. You don't have the options that you think you have. Many people are messing up very good relationships because they think that they've got options. And I'm saying this from some observations I've made with some discussions I've been having with, and some things I've been seeing with people and how they talk about, the experiences in their relationships. And you realize, many people actually think they've got options, and they're messing up good thing, or they're not giving their best in relationships because they think that they've got options. And once you understand that there are two things that make something an option, is that an option is something that you actually want, and that it's something that is actually accessible to you. Those two things are essential in defining something as being an option. That when you look at your options, there's a question you must ask yourself, that these options, are they of things that I actually want? And are they of things that are accessible to me? And these things are both essential for something to be deemed an option. And if one of them is not there, or both of them is not there, that thing can't be said as an option. So for example, let's say that someone is offering you something. Let's say someone offers to sell me wigs, for example. I don't want wigs. And even if I can afford it, it's not something that I want, right? Just because you can afford it, it's accessible. The lack of wanting it makes it not an option. Right? Because I don't want it, it's not an option. The second is of that accessibility. So you might want certain things. There's someone else who might want them. So I might, for example, say that, hey, I want to buy a very expensive vehicle, let's say a Ferrari or whatever, Lamborghini or whatever expensive car that is. Just because you might want it doesn't make it an option, because it's at the moment, at the present time of recording this thing, because I don't have the money in the account to buy that thing, it's not an option. I might like it, I might want it with all my heart, but until I can afford it, until I have accessibility to it, it's not an option. And many of us think we have options of things just because they're accessible to us, So as a lady, you might have 50, 30, 20 guys in your DMs telling you that, hey, they want to marry you, they want to do all of these things for you. But to be honest, they are not what you want, a lot of them, They are not your preference, you're not attracted to them, they are different in terms of, their culture, their beliefs, they are not what you want. But because there are 30, 50 guys banging at your door telling you they want to do all of these things, you think you've got options. But they are not what you desire. And until because of that, they are not an option. And likewise, you can use an example of gents. There are women that you might like, or that you might be interested in, and there might be, a number of them. But if you tell the truth, you really don't have access to some of them. You really don't have access. And because you don't have access, you might try with all your might to access. But until you can qualify to access, they really can't be regarded as an option. So an option has to have two things for it to qualify to be an option. It's something that you and I want, and it's something that you can actually access. And if you look at the many things that you regard as options, especially in this area of relationships, they are not really options, because it might not be something that you want or something that you even have access to. Now, why does this matter? There's this thing called the paradox of choice. The paradox of choice is the idea that, and I might not explain it perfectly, but it's the idea that when it comes to decision making, we get distressed in decision making when we have too many options. So let's say you want to go buy a packet of chips at the store, at the supermarket, and you want to just buy a packet of chips just to feed your appetite. You get to the store, and then there's Doritos, there's Simba, there's Lay's, there's Knick Knacks, there's all of these things. Then they're all options. And because there's so many options, you get distressed in your decision making because you've got too many options to choose from. And so you never fully commit to any one of them. And even if you do commit, there's always that inkling in your mind to say, I picked the Knick Knacks, but I wonder how the pecan bites taste. Or I wonder how the Doritos taste. Yes, I like these, but I just wonder what would have happened if I picked the Lay's, And because of that, you're never fully satisfied with the option that you make, right? You're never fully satisfied with the decision of what you chose in your options. And so that's what's called the paradox of choice. It's the idea that the more options we have, we think that we actually are better when we have many options. But the idea that is the more options you have, the more distress it actually causes. But if you were to go to the supermarket and they told you, no, we only sell one packet of chips, only Knick Knacks, or we only sell Doritos, In as much as you might have wanted so many other things, but because this is all that is on the table, this is the only options you have. Because that's the only option you have, you then make the decision and you're satisfied and content with the decision because these are the options that were on the table. And in relationships, we are a first generation that is laden with so many options. You log into Instagram, you log into Facebook, you log into Twitter, and there's so many different women, or there's so many different men. And so we think we've got all these options, and it makes you dissatisfied with the options that you have, and so you never fully commit. And if you do commit, you're never fully content or satisfied, and you don't give it your best because of the inkling that no, but there's something better out there. And that's something that's plaguing so many relationships from what I've seen and from the things I've heard people talk about, is the fact that we think you've got so many options. And so you never fully give your best in the place where you are. And so you never fully experience a fully satisfying relationship. Because of the idea that it's the paradox of choice. I've got all these options of what I could choose. And until you do that, you will never really be fully satisfied. It's the paradox of choice. Now, I spoke about the idea of an option being something that you actually desire. And maybe it's important to say this. There's a blessing in having limited options because it's a consequence of having standards. You know, if you were to hire someone and then you set a job criteria or a job spec, you outline all the criteria of what you want for that person, right? You set standards. You want them to be this educated. You want them to have this many years of experience. You want them to have this ability, this skill, this background, this certification, etc., etc. Those standards narrow the number of people that can qualify for the job. And the more standards you have, the narrower and narrower is the list of people who can actually sign up for the job and actually qualify. So limited options is a consequence of having heightened standards. And many of us are arrogant and pompous at the thought that you've got so many options without realizing that it's an evidence of lowered standards. That because if it's like, for example, the list of people who can afford to buy a Bentley is far lower than the list of people who can afford to buy a Taz or a Toyota, because they've set such a high standard of price, of quality, of brand, etc. Heightened standards result in a consequence of limited options. And when it comes to relationships as well, there's a blessing in having narrow and limited options because it's an evidence of heightened standards. It's an evidence of having standards per game. Now, I spoke about that options, you don't have as many options as you think you have. When you look at the options that you think you have, the ones that are causing you to not give your best in a relationship, the ones that are causing you, it might not apply to you, obviously, because you're good people, but that affect relationships in our day. It's the idea that people have options because of, what social media and all these things have put in front of our eyes, without realizing that an option has to have two things: something that you actually desire and something that you actually have access to. The 30, 50 people that are in your DMs, my sister, are they things that you actually want? Is it something that you actually want? Say, these are my standards that I've set for myself. This is what I want. If it's not what you want, don't regard those things as options. They are not options. They are distractions. And my brother, there are these 40, 10, 20, whatever women that you're DMing, that you like, that you're interested in, that you desire, but you don't have access. There are some way you just don't qualify. You're not what they want. Don't regard those as options, because you don't qualify. And there's a blessing, again, as I say, in realizing that there's limited options, because it's a consequence of having heightened standards. It's a consequence of being clear about what you want and being clear about what your standards are, and secondly, being clear about what you have access to. And once you realize that you don't have that many options, maybe it'll enable people to actually give their best in the relationships that they're in, or relationships that they pursue, relationships that they're going to, or help encourage others to give their best. And this is not to say that people must be stuck in, abusive situations, in situations that are not good, if you see that something's not working or whatever. But it's to dispel something that's causing so much havoc, man, in committing to people who are good people. It's the fact that you don't have as many options as you think you have. There's a person who's really good, and you are thinking, what if there's someone better? Because of the fact that you think you've got options. It's the paradox of choice. Because you think you've got so many things to choose from, it's causing distress when it comes to decision making. There's a blessing in having standards that narrow the parameters of those who you can regard as options. I hope this has been valuable to you. I don't like talking about relationships because these things can get so controversial. It can cause so many fights. It's a very touchy area. But maybe it can spark a discussion. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, I'm out of my mind as I say these things. But let me know what you think. I hope this has been valuable to you. Wishing you all the best. Much love.